Hey homies, what's good? It's the Tominator. So had a fun little idea recently, and that was to do a tier list for all the major muscle groups, ranking their importance in modern day bodybuilding. Modern day meaning the past 20 to 30 years or so. Let's say anything since Dorian Yates started his reign. This is because the rankings would be quite different for old school bodybuilding, where there was less emphasis on mass and conditioning, and more on proportions and aesthetics. Maybe if there's time, I'll do a quick alternative version for that at the end. But anyway, here we've got all the body parts lined up at the bottom in alphabetical order. So first up is abs, or midsection. Now, up until the last couple of years, I would have had this firmly in the C tier, because the midsection honestly just isn't that important for winning major titles. Just look at Ronnie and Phil cleaning up for years, often with bloated 4-pack abs. But with the constant backlash on social media sort of forcing the judges to change their tune, it now seems to be shifting back into vogue. A lot of casual viewers might believe this should be A or even S tier, but frankly that's rubbish. While the midsection is uniquely important in that it is the center point of the body that ties everything together, so long as you don't have a massive bubble gut, it's not really going to cost you. Therefore, it's solid B material. The only pose you really need nicely formed abs for is the ab and thigh. In every other front shot, you can hide poor abdominals by simply sucking in for a partial vacuum, or else bending over in the case of the most muscular. Next up is biceps. Biceps are A tier in my book. They may be relatively small, but they're arguably the flashiest muscle there is, and if you happen to have soaring bicep peaks, you can bet that'll attract a lot of positive attention. The bis are a key factor in 3 poses: the front double biceps, the back double biceps, and the most muscular. They also play a smaller role in the side chest and the side tri, as well as a number of non-compulsory signature poses. Okay, calves, the black sheep of modern bodybuilding. It's sad because calves are a highly impressive muscle group when fully developed, but the judges these days tend to turn a blind eye towards them. Based on that, you might conclude that calves should be D tier, but for me at least, they've got to still deserve a C. I'm really trying to reserve that bottom tier for total irrelevance, and calves, while they clearly aren't weighted very heavily anymore, certainly not as much as they should, they're still a muscle that has to be taken into consideration. They are, after all, visible in basically every pose, and supposed to be flexed in any side and back shots. So if it were up to me, they'd be B tier, but hey, what can you do? Alright, next up we've got delts or shoulders, which are S tier all the way. The shoulders are visible from all angles. In the front double, you need good front delts to make them pop and balance out the biceps. In a front lat spread, you want to have nice capped side delts to help augment your width and V-taper. In the side chest and side tri, you want to show a lot of thickness there from front to back, with a nice split between the front delt and pec, plus a well-developed rear delt. In the back double, we get to see all 3 heads of the shoulders at once, so you gotta have them looking round and neatly separated. And obviously in the most muscular, the shoulders are incredibly important. Twin cannonballs are a necessity there to really nailing any version of that shot. The only poses in which they're not really relevant are the abs and thigh and the rear lat spread. So yeah guys, that's 6 out of 8, and that easily qualifies for S tier. Moving on, we've got forearms. Like the calves, forearms are often kind of ignored. Multiple-time Arnold Classic champs like Branch Warren and Kai Green, and even 4-time Mr. O, Jay Cutler, were all pretty weak in this area, it has to be said. Yet it certainly didn't seem to hold them back. The forearms are what you might call a nice to have, not a need to have. That said, they do play a part in most of the mandatories. The front and back double, the side chest, the most muscular, even the front lat spread. The forearms are on display and ought to be accounted for. But as we already established, even underdeveloped forearms don't seem to be heavily punished, so this has got to be C tier. Okay, glutes. The one muscle group I refuse to cover in the top 10 body parts series, simply because it's obvious fodder for trolls and homosexuals. Not that there's anything wrong with that, But you guys can get your kicks elsewhere, okay? I'm not about to describe men's butt cheeks in eloquent detail for 20 plus minutes. Anyway, when it comes to modern bodybuilding, the glutes are highly prized, and probably overrated if we're being honest. But like it or not, striated glutes are the hallmark of great conditioning, since they're typically one of the last areas to get shredded. For that reason, I've gotta begrudgingly put this in with the A's. It's only really a factor in the back poses, and a little in the side chest, less so in the side triceps where guys tend to stand up straighter and often turn to the front more. But still, conditioning kills, and so ripped glutes are indispensable. Good luck winning a contest today with a soggy backside. Hamstrings likewise are essential. They might not be the flashiest body part, getting completely overshadowed by their counterpart the quads, but hamstrings are probably the second most important muscle group when it comes to showcasing conditioning. They're vital in the two back poses and also in the side chest, where the size and sweep really come into play and help differentiate a great lower body from a mediocre one. Like the back, they can be difficult to train and connect with mentally, so usually the younger guys tend to lag behind a bit in this area, which often helps separate the seasoned vets from the rookies. Still, I'm wavering between an A and a B for this one. I think it just scrapes by. Let's call it an A-. The lats are up next. For anybody following my Instagram, I already kind of spoiled this one, but it really shouldn't come as a surprise. The lats are automatic S tier, no doubt about it. First of all, they're crucial for width, taper, and overall back development. Secondly, they're obviously a key component in the back double and both lat spreads, not to mention the front double, front and rear relaxed, and even factor into the ab and thigh. It's hard to think of a more quintessential bodybuilding feature than a nice V-taper. And if shows are won from the back, which I'm not sure is entirely accurate, but the saying still has some merit, then lats are unquestionably king. As for the lower back or Christmas tree, this is another example of a nice to have, not a need to have. Like the forearms, it's just a sweet bonus if you got it, but it's not really going to hold you back, since it only briefly makes an appearance when transitioning into the rear lat spread. For that reason, it's no higher than a C. Now, it's true that some of the more genetically gifted individuals in this area can showcase a Christmas tree in the rear relaxed or rear lat spread, sometimes even the back double, but this is so rare you can't really penalize a bodybuilder for not having it. As we saw with the abs then, so long as your lower back isn't terrible, which in this case I guess would just manifest as soft and wrinkly, it's not really going to matter. This next pick represents the neck, which, of course, is so overwhelmingly critical that it's immediately S tier. I can't stress this enough, guys. In fact, I think we need to add a double S tier or an S+, not sure what even goes above S, to signify its unique preeminence. But nah, just messing with you. The neck is the reason the D tier exists, okay? It's totally useless. Now, don't get me wrong, proportionately, you don't want a skinny pencil neck. According to pioneers like Steve Reeves, the neck ideally ought to be the same measurement as the arms and calves. That might have been true back in the day, but almost no champion today meets that criteria. The upper arms have continued to grow to astronomical levels, while the neck, and especially the calves, have been left behind in the dust. The real reason I say the neck isn't important, though, is because I'm not including the traps in this equation. Even if you have a small neck, huge upper traps can effectively mask that. The neck is also the one body part that isn't meant to be flexed, ever. Arnold explained in his Encyclopedia Bodybuilding that this was because it was kind of off-putting with all the veins and tendons bulging out, and it also looked too strained. You want to appear relaxed and composed on stage, right? Not like you're about to burst a blood vessel. Therefore, the neck gets no love at all and is relegated to the D League. The pecs are up next. The glorious pectorals. And man, I'm gonna piss some people off with this, but in my opinion, pecs are B tier. Most would probably assume an A or maybe even S, but really, how many poses do they make or break? The side chest is the only one where the pecs are the main focus. After that, yes, a thick chest is valuable in the front lat spread and most muscular, but it's not the primary muscle in either of those shots. Moreover, the way they hit poses today, weak pecs can effectively be compensated for with great shoulders or arms. Even the side chest has largely been turned into a twisting hands clasp most muscular. Someone like Phil Heath is a prime example of this. So no, I don't think pecs deserve an A, much less an S. They're great to have and still important, but not truly essential. As a consolation, I will admit that in the old school era, like back in Arnold's time, the pecs were a lot more important. But it doesn't seem to be that way now. Heck, a lot of top pros today don't even show striations in it anymore. Just look at Big Ramy last year. Huge, dense chest, almost no detail. So I think that is part of the reason the pecs have fallen from grace in recent decades. Alright, moving on, the quadriceps are automatic S tier. When we talk about who has great legs versus who doesn't, we're almost always referring to the quads above all else. They are the largest muscle group of the lower body and are crucial in any front pose, especially the front lat spread and ab and thigh, where they're generally fully flexed. After the glutes, they're also one of the best indicators of conditioning, as it's very difficult for most guys to get deep cuts in their thighs nowadays. Depending on genetics, they can also show some highly impressive cross striations or feathering, which really helps elevate you above the rest of the pack. But the quads are not only relevant from the front, they also come into play from the side, where you want to see good thickness and separation along that outer head. Heck, even from the rear they can be visible if you've got sufficient outer sweep and adopt the right stance. So really, the only time the quads aren't a factor is say, in the crab most muscular, where they tend to get hidden in shadow when you bend over. In fact, when you break it down like that, the quads might even be the most important body part there is. Not even the lats were involved in more poses. And the quads are certainly more variable in terms of mass and genetic potential than the shoulders. So yeah, I can't rank them highly enough. Alright, we're almost there, guys. Traps are B tier. I was originally going to have them as A since they're so important to the back shots, but aside from those two poses and the crab most muscular, they aren't really noticeable in anything else. Well, I guess the rear relaxed also, but that's still not enough to justify an A. Lastly, the triceps. This was a tough one. I kept hovering between A and S. On the one hand, the triceps are visible in nearly every pose to some extent. They're obviously the namesake of the side triceps pose and the main focal point there, but they're also very important in the front and back double, the most muscular, and even the side chest. What made Kevin Levrone so special in the hands clasp? It was mainly the triceps, by my estimation. Sure, the delts and traps were crazy too, but without those bulging triceps bellies jutting out, the whole shot would have fallen flat. Even in poses where they're not the main focus, namely the lat spreads and the ab and thigh, they still play a role and can showcase some nice sweep. So like the shoulders, this is a very versatile muscle. I wanted to put them S tier because I think they're a step above the biceps. The triceps account for 2/3 of the upper arm after all, so by definition, they've got to be more important. But I don't know, can you really rank them on the same level as the quads or lats? I'm gonna tentatively lump them in with the A's for now, but really, they're an A+ or S-. Biceps would be an A or A- by comparison. Alright guys, so that's my rankings. Keep in mind, as we mentioned in the beginning, this was for modern bodybuilding, meaning anything from the 90s to 2000s and onwards. If we're talking about old school bodybuilding, however, well, that's a very different picture. So, as a little bonus, here's how I'd reorder it for the 60s, 70s, and 80s. Not going to go into nearly as much detail since the runtime's already getting a little long, but I'll just briefly explain some of the changes. First of all, pecs immediately get elevated to S tier. Arnold, Haney, Franco, Ferrigno, Serge Nubret. What did all these icons have in common? Phenomenal chest development. Coincidence? Maybe, but I don't think so. They weren't running such high levels of gear back then, and this didn't allow the surrounding musculature like the shoulders and traps to become overdeveloped to the point where they are today, and so the pecs tended to stand out more. Moreover, they retained an amazing level of definition and striations that you rarely see anymore since the rise of insulin. They also had a different way of striking the side chest. This was probably best exemplified by Arnold, who would puff up his rib cage and prop up his chest to put it on full display. None of this crunching down and turning the pose into a modified most muscular, or a quote-unquote front chest as he jokingly called it in Pumping Iron. Biceps likewise get bumped up to S. Arnold, Robbie Robinson, Albert Beckles, Bertil Fox, Larry Scott way back when, these guys all had legendary biceps. Again, the biceps is an easier muscle to develop naturally or with minimal drug use than, say, the shoulders or quads, so it tended to stand out more on these old-school physiques. The lats remain at the top because the V-taper was still the primary hallmark of the professional bodybuilder. It's what separated them from other elite athletes like wrestlers, boxers, or football stars. Haney and Franco, Samir and Arnold, Brian Buchanan, they all thrived on this attribute. As for the A tier, the glutes drop all the way down to D because they frankly weren't counted back then. The posing trunks completely covered them, at least until the 80s when guys like Rich Kaspari started experimenting with showing them off a little. But it still wasn't something that was really judged, as far as I can tell. The calves jump up to A because they were highly regarded, much more so than they are today. Arnold, for instance, made it his personal mission to improve his lackluster calves, and eventually grew some of the best that his era had to offer. Sergio Oliva had some nice ones also, as did Chris Dickerson. In fact, it was pretty much unheard of to see that drumstick style of leg that is all too common today. You know, a lot of meat up top, but just a skinny bone on the bottom. Anyway, triceps remain right where they are and the abs move up. A streamlined midsection was obviously more sought after back then, before the onset of the bubble gut and overeating became the norm, trying to get as large as humanly possible. Serge Nubret and Frank Zane are a testament to that. Quads and delts both fall to B since they were good to have, but less important than they are today, while forearms move up because guys actually trained them and put more focus on ensuring they were proportionate to the upper arms. Larry Scott, Sergio Oliva, Mike Menser, and Gunnar Rosbo all boasted elite sets of forearms, and this was one area, along with the chest, where the old school guys were surprisingly competitive with newer generations. Okay, so I moved neck up a smidge because, like we noted, it was more desirable to maintain proportions back then, with guys like Reeves and Zane having more or less matching measurements between their neck and arms. The lower back remains a nice detail piece, but ultimately non-essential. Even though Arnold, Samir, and Barry DeMay all represented some of the very best in history in this regard, I wouldn't directly attribute their successes to their lower backs primarily. Finally, the hamstrings. C tier at best, because they were largely irrelevant until around the mid-80s. Back in the 60s and 70s, the hammies, or leg biceps as they often used to be called, were almost never in proper condition by today's standards. And I can't think of a single old-school side chest pose with a good hanging hamstring. Maybe Tom Platz, but he was definitely the exception, not the rule. So yeah, these might even be D tier, but we'll keep them a step above the glutes because, hey, at least the hamstrings were actually shown. Okay guys, so that's my revised rankings according to Golden Era standards. Let me know what you think of these placings, and how would you rank the muscle groups? Anything major you disagreed with here or would have ranked differently? Leave a comment below and I'll be sure to read them, and please don't forget to like and subscribe for more in-depth bodybuilding analysis like this. Until next time, it's the Tominator signing off, and I'll be back.